Hello there. In this video, I'm going to go through some of the important routing lessons I learned with my 4-zone Thorn build. I don't currently play an MMR that lets me say the build is really good or bad, as I'm only sitting at Bronze 2, 21 LP, but despite this, I have discovered some important lessons about routing and looting by experimenting with this build. I define routing as the planning of a build and its route, and looting as the in-game execution of the route. Looting also includes any on-the-fly deviations from the original plan. So let's get into the details. First, I'm going to go over the build itself. When I originally concocted the build, one of my main goals was to try making something that didn't have to teleport. I tried builds before that had to teleport a lot, and seemed to die many times as a result. My theory was that I'd stand a better chance at not dying if I didn't have to teleport. Additionally, there was a Korean build I'd used when I first started playing that didn't need to teleport, so it seemed like the idea could work. My other goal was to use Damascus Steel Thorn. I had heard some other players were using it and frankly just wanted to try it out. With that in mind, I made use of LumiaCraft to help me out. LumiaCraft has two features that the DAC.gg and BSGG.kr planners don't. The first is that it will start suggesting routes with incomplete builds. The second is that it tells you which other items are craftable along your current route. For build planning, this was a game changer. Those two features, combined with the ability to assert zone order, allowed me to flip how a build and route were planned. I could plan for the route first instead of the complete build. I didn't have to randomly flip through items and hope that the zones happened to become adjacent to each other. From this, my 4-zone Thorn build was born. The original route was Hospital, Pond, Avenue, Alley, though I ultimately flipped the Hospital and Avenue positions, and I'll get into the reasons for that later. Since my only real constraint was to use Thorn, I filled in the other items with whatever seemed like it could be good. Crystal Tiara and Optical Camouflage Suit were on the route, so I picked them up for a good amount of crit chance. Feather Boots and Lace Quiver I picked for the movement speed. Since Thorn doesn't have any movement speed on it like Karnwawan or Vibroblade do, the Quiver helps to make up for it a bit. The arm options were between Sword Stopper, Sheath of Shah Jahan, and Burnished Aegis. So I picked Sheath since it seemed like the most damage, and the max HP seemed nice too. At this point, I saw the main issue of this build and route as being the 3 leather requirement. Thorn is a 3-zone minimum, so it would be a while before I could really start finishing these items. While Sheath and Quiver were technically finishable in 2 zones, in practice I was finishing half my build in 3rd zone since I couldn't quickly get the leather before then. You could call this the first discovery. Just because something is technically finishable doesn't mean you can afford to finish. In my case, I was still sitting on base dagger in 2nd zone, and the only things with guaranteed leather drops were bears, which I definitely couldn't take on at that point. Fortunately, both Avenue and Hospital are zones with dogs, so there's very little RNG in getting leather if I was there and ready to kill them. Additionally, there are some bears and wolves in Alley as a backup. However, getting this leather proved to be too tall a task for the original route. Remember how I said I ended up flipping Hospital and Avenue? I did that because after I started testing the build, I was pretty consistently having trouble finding the nail and fountain pen, among other things, that I needed in Avenue. I think this was a combination of getting there as my 3rd zone and having a lot of inventory congestion issues once I was in the zone. Another limiting factor there is that Avenue is pretty popular, and most people would have their weapon done or mostly done by then, so I had to do a lot of running away. This further increased the time taken and likelihood that I wouldn't really be able to loot there. As a result, I decided I had to swap Avenue and Hospital if I was going to get those items consistently. I was hesitant at first since this would mean that I had to teleport, but I decided I had to try anyway since the route just wasn't working. While it did help for getting my weapon components, I was still struggling with consistency. Sometimes I'd find everything I need pretty quickly, but other times I'd have to walk all the way through Avenue trying to find my remaining components. It wasn't until a particularly bad game that I really started getting into the details in my VOD reviews to try and figure out what I could skip. There was a game where I had my weapon components off the first box. 4 seconds into the game, I could have gone to my 2nd zone, but I didn't realize it at the time. Instead, I spent the next 50 seconds collecting my other components before entering Pond. Now, entering Pond at 55 seconds into the game doesn't really seem like a big deal, right? I'd seen some notes on Shuvi Senpai's Lead Island build about wanting to enter 2nd zone in the 40 to 50 second range for in-game time, but I thought there'd probably be some more wiggle room. At least, until I spent the next 6 minutes just trying to complete my Thorn. That's right, I didn't complete my Thorn until 6 minutes and 57 seconds into that game. Many of the boxes in Pond were picked through, and I didn't arrive in hospital until the 2.5 minute mark after giving up on the rod and bamboo I needed. From there, things just spiraled out of control. I had to avoid everyone because I was sitting on an incomplete weapon for so long. I didn't really have any choice but to try ratting for placement that match. I didn't really even get to play the game. This is where I really started trying to optimize the looting for the route. I knew that being able to skip a few components was good, but this is where I really started figuring out the extent to which I could skip out on things. So I asked myself the question, what did I actually need in Avenue? And the answer was just a nail and fountain pen. Yep, that's it. The oil? I could make up later because I couldn't make shoes until I reached Alley anyways. The glass bottles and hairband? Well, those are for items I also couldn't finish until I got into Alley. So really, all the remaining components were things I could come back to Avenue for later if I really needed to. And Pond was a similar story. The only thing I really needed was a mousetrap for a weapon. If I was missing out on a hammer, I could probably pick one up in Alley if I was fast. The short rods, gems, and bamboo could be made up for in Temple if I missed out on them as well. When I was starting Hospital, the only thing I could really skip was the glue. And that's still the case for the routing now, but since I'm getting there so quick, I can usually find everything I need. I think I've only had one game so far where I wasn't able to find the second feather I need. I probably skipped it, and it probably wasn't a huge deal since I'm not salty about it like the 7-minute Thorn game. So the lesson here is that being able to skip items is very important both for speed and consistency, at least with this build. The last lesson was about food. When I changed the first 2 zones to Avenue and to Pond, that opened up some nice food opportunities. If I found some chocolate in Avenue, I could try to make choco pie boxes in Pond. If I found extra glass bottles, I could go for healing potions. Both are pretty good foods. But before I really started embracing and experimenting with skipping, I would often stay in zones just to look for food components. But now I'm thinking that's not so important. I understand food is good. Food advantage has won me many battles. However, being up 2 to 3 items on someone in the early game seems much better. Especially after dying to a lot of people while sitting on, a bunch of healing potions but not having the items to really do anything with them. And when I'm getting through zones pretty fast, I can usually make other food along the way. It's not usually as good as choco pies or healing boxes, since few things are, but being up on items has made me feel like I have way more agency in the game. I guess what I'm really getting at is that it's good to route nice food in early, but it seems like missing out early can be made up for later. Especially during lull states when there's no one nearby or I'm missing big cooldowns and don't want to fight anyways. So to summarize, some of the main lessons here are that my issues with teleporting probably had more to do with looting speed. The leather requirements can make the completion zones for items a little bit misleading for 3-zone builds in particular. Getting aggressive about skipping components can really help with speed and efficiency on the right routes. And going out of my way for food in the early game seems like a pretty big time efficiency killer. So with that, I think the video is done. If you enjoyed this or found it to be helpful, I'd really appreciate a like. This is my first scripted video, so I'm not too confident about it. And if you really want, you can subscribe as well. But either way, thank you so much for watching all the way through, and I hope to see you again.